Welcome back to the Packed with Expertise podcast. This is episode 2 of our Sustainable Packaging series. We're joined today again by Michelle Bryson, Global Sustainable Packaging Leader for BW Packaging. And today we're also joined by Scott Yurjevich, VP of Commercial Excellence for BW Packaging. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how brand owners can get the most value from their early conversations with OEMs about sustainable packaging projects. Thanks, guys, for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Michelle, you've joined us before. You've been on the podcast before, but Scott, this is your first appearance on the show. So if you don't mind, just take a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join. In my role leading commercial excellence for the packaging platform, I have a couple of different responsibilities. The first is to lead our global key account and regional business development teams. I also work very closely with our divisional sales organizations to help establish best practices to develop new tools that they can use while they're out in the market, as well as to deliver training. Prior to working at Berry Waymiller, I spent the previous 20 years working for a primary packaging company where we were focused on helping our customers deliver to their sustainability goals. So I guess I bring a little bit of a unique perspective in that I've seen both sides of working on projects with some of the largest brand owners in the world, both as a material supplier as well as an equipment manufacturer.
Thanks for the intro. We really appreciate it. Then, Michelle, without really repeating everything that we went through in episode 1, could you just give us kind of the quick 30-second version of why is it important for brand owners to engage with their OEM so early?
Yeah, for sure. So, for us, it's really our recommendation to brand owners is really that early collaboration starts to create the synergy that's needed between the product, the package, and the equipment to bring the whole innovation to life. And the earlier you start that collaboration, the more likely that the brand owner is going to have an opportunity to see early success in their startup or their, the first time that material and the product and the equipment come together is not the day that you're just like really counting on that product to get out the door.
Yeah, makes sense. So when you talk about early collaboration, what do you really mean by early? Because, for example, if you're switching to a sustainable package, that could be as simple as just doing a changeover, or it could require multiple years of R&D to develop a solution that, meets whatever your sustainability goals and requirements are. So just understanding that every situation is different, what are some of the signals that brand owners can look for to let them know it's time to call an OEM?
Yeah, I think the high level time to call the OEM is when you are starting to hear that you've got innovation on the horizon and you're not exactly sure what that material might be. But, if you reach out to your OEM, your brand, the brand owners might have some early insights that can be really successful to help them say, all right, we might know for anything running on our equipment that these materials have been successful, and it might just be, a setting change in the heating jaws, or it might be, how the material, the film is pulling through the machine versus something like that's going to take us a very long lead time. So we've seen lead times be anywhere between, hey, just simple, just heat adjustments to 6 months to come up with new forming colors to 2 years to come up with, something that might take special design for cutting through PET on thermoforming machines. So for us, we talk about good, better, best in that scenario. Good would be, early on, just at minimum, bringing your OEM into the trials. Better would be when you've got at least 3 to 6 months ahead of that first run where you can start collaborating and having that testing done in our locations before you get to trials. And then best would be something where you're looking at 6 months to 2 years ahead of time, because you might have a full portfolio that you're looking to launch. Some of it's going to be short term and some of it's going to be longer.
And Michelle, I know we've talked about this in the past, but I guess from my perspective, it's also part of our responsibility as the OEM to be in there early with our customers before there's even a project so that we better understand their sustainability goals, which ultimately is going to enable us to be in front of those material suppliers. So we're proactively developing relationships and working on potential solutions that could impact us when that project comes up. So I think we talked about good, better, and best. I think that's where all of us, I know that's where I want my team to be, is where we're in a place where we're having those conversations early on with the brand owners so that we understand their overarching needs in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, I love what Scott just did there, is kind of flip the vantage point a little bit. So when Taz, you were asking, what should the OEM or the brand owners, sorry, be doing? What Scott really said is, what's our part to play in that? Not just that we're sitting back and waiting for that to come. So we take time, his team takes time with the key accounts and basically ask those questions, or get me involved to say, how can we help you? Our team is an amazing group of people that want to do the right things for our customers, not just today, not just selling a machine, but it's that ongoing relationship of continuing to support them in their journeys for innovation.
Thank you, guys. Scott, this one's specifically for you, but Michelle, obviously, feel free to jump in as well. When you're meeting with a brand owner for the first time to talk about any capital equipment project, and there are some sustainability considerations at play, what's the information that you're hoping that they'll provide to you so that you can have a more productive conversation that drives all parties towards the best solution possible?
I would say so first of all, the most important thing, and I know this doesn't directly answer your question, but the most important thing is giving us access. So enabling us to speak to those individuals within the brand owning organization or with the secondary supplier, so that we can ask the right questions to understand overall what the goals are. So allowing access is really important. As far as some of the things that we would hope to understand, it's best for us when we understand what the goal is, so that we can work together to develop a solution, which means, as Michelle had indicated earlier, we need to be with our customers early on in those discussions. It positions us in a much better way to deliver the right solution, rather than to work with what's already been developed to shoehorn it into what we're doing today.
And before we started recording, you had mentioned, I can't remember if it was you or Michelle had mentioned kind of these silos that we see sometimes within brand owner organizations, and that sometimes the people you're sitting with at the table aren't even necessarily in alignment with their own teams. Could you guys talk a little bit about that and why it's so important to do that before you come to an OEM meeting?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think we're all driven to accomplish the goals that we have set out in front of us. What that means, and it doesn't matter if you're part of Barry Waymiller or if you're working for a brand owner, it doesn't matter where you are. We're oftentimes really focused on achieving the goals that we have in front of us. We don't take the time to understand the people that are working side by side with us and to understand the goals that they're driving toward. Mm-hmm. So we do tend to operate in silos oftentimes. What that means for us as an OEM is it's very likely we could be talking to an engineer whose responsibility is really to spec out a piece of equipment, really probably more focused on how fast it's going to run, the size, how it's going to fit in their facility, what we're going to do in terms of installation and training. They're maybe not as focused, or maybe don't spend the same amount of time identifying the materials that are going to run, or identifying how we can utilize this new machine to help drive the sustainability goals of an organization. So, I think silos are real. We all operate within them. I know we also try to break across to understand other people's goals, but again, this is an area where I think that access is really important. So one of the things that we work with our sales organization on is identifying all of those individuals on a project who are influencing the decision to purchase a piece of equipment, so that we have the ability to talk to them, to understand what their needs are, what goals they're driving toward, so that we can work together to create a solution that can come as close as possible to meeting all those needs.
Scott, too, coming from the brand owner background for so many years, I would have really great relationships with my engineering counterparts. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, as the packaging engineer, you might not know when their decision is to buy that machine. Right. And so those decisions could be made, 18 months to 2 years ahead of time, and you're still trying to figure out what materials are going to work for the product. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times that, that reference to silos, it could be intentional, it could be, not intentional, but I would say probably not intentional.
Mhm.
but that they're there, and their accountability is to deliver a machine to make sure it's ready at the time the production's ready.
Yeah.
And you might have product development still working on the profile of the product itself. So we might not necessarily know, and I say we as the former, packaging engineer in that scenario, might not really know what the final combination is going to be. And I had a time that I worked on something, and it was fairly crazy that that machine, the material and the product finally came together in real time. So it was running at speed within 2 weeks of that first start production. Just it's very stressful.
Yeah.
And so when you have those conversations early on, and you can just say, sneak peek under the tent, tell me what's going on, we have an opportunity to help deliver in a more um, a broader range that says, hey, if you were originally looking at this machine, you might have this scope. But if you're looking at this machine, it's going to give you a wider scope so that you still have opportunities to choose further
Mhm.
down the line. So I think that's another, how you build or how you think about what might be considered a silo, and how it's not necessarily anybody's issue or challenge, right? But it's just, it happens. So the earlier on that we can entertain those conversations, it makes a big difference.
It's interesting. Michelle, you come from more of a brand owner background, and Scott, you come from more of a primary packaging background. I'm curious if either of you have one or two things that stick out to you that you were maybe surprised about whenever you moved over to the OEM side.
It's funny, the first thing that comes to my mind is trade shows, but I know that's not what I care about. Go for it, Scott. I think you were having something that came to mind.
Yeah, no, the biggest surprise for me was the point at which we become engaged with the customer. So we've talked a lot today about the importance of engaging early on as an OEM. When we're developing primary packaging, that's not necessarily the first call a brand owner will make. They're probably working on their device or whatever goes into that
Sure.
package. But we're pretty close as a primary packaging company. We were pretty close to that first call. So we would start with a project 2 or 3 years before it was launched into the market, because everything we would do was custom. The lead times are much shorter when it comes to supplying equipment. So the call we get typically is when the product is fully developed. There's a pretty good understanding of what the packaging is going to look like, and now we've got to figure out a way to execute what's already been developed, and that puts a lot of pressure on the brand owner as well as the OEM to ensure we're enabling them to get to the market in the time that they have in place for that project. That was a big surprise for me, just the timing at which we become involved.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing on my side of things, is that I kind of knew that, because we build those timelines, and usually there's like this 12 to 18 months lead time for equipment. But to your point, since the product's already further along, since the materials have already been pre-vetted, because you have to know what's going to survive, the product and the packaging material have to meet each other earlier on. I think we were just learning this with one other recent conversation with one of our key customers, and they have to hit some level of success with quality and make sure that that product is passing quality before they can ever do longer trials. So it's like, how, if we can offer to our customers the opportunity to test that material in our facilities, that can be a huge unlock. And so we were even just sharing that with one of these customers. They know us, but they didn't know that we had some machines that travel through our facilities all the time. It might not be their machine, could be somebody else's, could be going to a trade show, but we have machines. And so when we can help them and say, hey, bring in your product, let's get it through, let's get it tested so you can do that matchup, then they'll be able to offer longer line trials.
Right.
They can get that very valuable time to be, critical in such a way that they've already understood what those machine settings are going to be, or at least to have like a starting point instead of starting blind. And I think that that's such an important piece. I've had some great success with that with previous OEMs that I've worked with, and our team's desire to support our customers in that space is probably not as well known as it might be if, if they had those earlier conversations with us, And I
Right.
think that we're talking about that with anybody that we can. You are, I know, I am, I know. We just want our customers to know that that's a huge way to help de-risk their package.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I can tell you that as a primary packaging supplier, we worked hard to develop relationships with equipment companies because we knew that at some point, whatever we made was going to run across a machine. So
Mhm.
we would work very hard to develop those relationships proactively so that we knew that when we were coming to our customers with a solution, we had something that was somewhat vetted and that we knew that there was a way it was going to run. And I see us doing the same thing
Mhm.
as equipment suppliers, is beginning to develop those relationships with
Yeah,
material suppliers, putting more of an emphasis on that so
yeah,
that we're prepared when that project comes to us, so that we have an understanding of what we can predict for the future, for
yeah.
future packaging.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece, Scott, that you bring up is the supplier relationships. When I first got here about 18 months ago, it took me a minute to kind of figure out who we were working with.
Mhm.
But then as I started to talk across the divisions, there are some suppliers that started to traverse across, and those are important ones for us to keep an eye on, keep that finger on the pulse of what they're doing, to your point, because not only are they playing in flexible, they might be playing in thermoforming, they might be playing in rigids, which some of them are.
Mhm.
And as such, they are also part of, you can see it, their growth strategies, like what categories they want to grow in, kind of
Mhm.
align with our growth strategies. So I think there's some beauty there in terms of the relationships that we develop. It can be helping support each other, that material to the OEM connection. And then when you talk to one, you'll invariably learn about the other that has been running their material. So,
Mhm.
that's been a huge opportunity that we've been exploring and expanding, and there's certainly more to do for us in that space as well.
Michelle, you kind of draw on your experience as a brand owner quite often. When you're sitting across the table from an OEM, what are some of the things that you look for to try to evaluate and understand whether or not they're going to be a good partner for a sustainability or a sustainable packaging project?
Awesome question. A lot of times, as a brand owner, you've got machinery in play that you want to keep using that machinery. You don't want to have to spend money that is not necessary to be spent if, in fact, they've got change parts or opportunities to retrofit something that's already an asset in a facility. It's already got a footprint. It's already running. So I think the most important thing for me, I would ask our OEMs when I was on the brand owner side, what can we do to retrofit what we have? Do you have change parts? Have you already seen this material running? And so the more that OEM was aware, they've already seen it, they had decent ideas about what could be done for change parts, or, hey, no, that's just a heat setting. Or, when you're running that in this type of an environment, the environment might have an impact. Something I learned when I was working on, in a warm climate, in a cold beverage, that those two things came together and created condensation on the package, and labeling was difficult to apply. I mean, it's what experiences do you already have, Mr. and Mrs. OEM, that you can, help my life become easier? That's always what I was looking for. Number one.
Scott, curious if you have similar question for you. When you were working with an OEM as a primary packaging company, what was what were some of the nuggets of information you were hoping that they could provide to you to help you work together more effectively?
Yeah, what was always really important to me was just to understand how they intend to work together with their material suppliers. So just having the ability to talk about the collaborative process, to talk about the ways in which we would engage to work together to develop something. So what was really important to me, again, I said it earlier, but just having that access, having access to the equipment, being able to run some of our materials, whether I worked for a custom thermoformer and extruder. So whether it be to run our thermoform parts or just run our materials through the equipment to see how it would run, to ensure that what we were beginning to develop was going to be effective when it was actually going to market was really important. So being able to talk about that collaborative process, what it looked like.
Through this podcast, what we're really doing is creating some dialogue around what that collaborative process ideally should look like moving forward. I'm curious to hear from both of you on what does the ideal collaborative process for packaging solutions look like?
Yeah, so for me, for one of the things that we absolutely want to be doing is working with our customers to inform the innovation process, including sustainability. So if we speak to customers and they say, hey, I want to be able to have a readout at the HMI, that human interface that tells me this is how much kilowatt hours I'm running, we need to know that so that we design it into the machinery so that it's not a one-off, that our teams aren't having to custom create something every time. We want to, hey, did 80% of our customers say they want that? Well, that's a win then. Or if we said, what else is it? Is it just that you want us to reduce the amount of kilowatt hours that machine draws so that when you are plugging it in and firing it up, that you're not burning as many kilowatt hours? We want to design for that. And we want to make it such that that was created in the flow of the equipment design so that for the customers who truly want that, that can be something that's turned on. For customers who may not be there yet in their sustainability journey, that doesn't have to be part of their equation. They won't have to bear the burden of that cost. So we've designed it in such a way that it can be made for both scenarios. That would be true collaboration.
I think that's great. I guess the only thing that I would add to it, Michelle, would be, in addition to collaborating around innovation, I think it's just really important for us as an OEM to be with our customers when there isn't a project. So to be in there to ask them questions about their sustainability goals, to ask them questions about their overarching goals, but really to understand their sustainability goals, to understand a little bit more about who they're working with from a material standpoint, so that we have the ability to proactively go in to those material suppliers and start developing relationships. So for me, that collaboration should be something that's circular, that enables us all to work together across various points of I guess, the scope of where a project is, even before there's actually a project. So we're working together to innovate, to create something new, to build something that will positively impact our environment.
I love that. You just said circular, which is the circular economy, which that's just another way to look at circular economy. And so that we're meeting with customers where they are, whether there's something that's hot or there's something that's, got that future vision.
Yeah.
Both of you have kind of drawn on past experiences working, as a brand owner or as a primary packaging provider. But today, as an OEM, what are some of the best questions that you've been asked during these meetings by brand owners that have helped all parties arrive at the best solution faster?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I've mentioned collaboration probably more than I should through the course of this podcast, but the reality is, one of the best questions that's been asked of me, or me and my team, I should say, is to really describe our collaborative process, to help identify how we're all going to work together to drive toward a common goal. Even though my focus may be on equipment, we have somebody else who's more focused on creating the packaging, developing the materials that's truly driving the sustainability. So that's one of the best questions that's asked of me, is just to describe how we're all going to work together to drive toward that common goal.
Makes sense.
So Taz, one of the other questions that's been asked of me that I think is a really important one is about retrofits and upgrades. So we have customers out there who have our equipment today, and they're coming to us now and asking if we're developing sustainable solutions for upgrades on the equipment, so that they don't have to buy a new machine just to drive toward their sustainability goals. I think that's a really important question, because it's one thing to add sustainability into your innovation process. It's a whole nother to work on upgrades, to work on ways to help enhance your existing equipment that's out in the market to enable it to drive toward our customer sustainability goals.
Absolutely, Scott. That is the number one thing that I would always ask. Like, I didn't always want somebody coming at me as a former brand owner to say, I've got this new thing. Like, but what can we do today? What can we do now on this machine that we already have? I mean, if you're changing forms altogether, yes, you're going to need new machinery. But if it's something that can be retrofitted, that to me was golden.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And it shows a real commitment to sustainability. If
Yeah.
you're developing not just new things, but if you're working toward driving toward those goals with
Yeah.
upgrades.
Yeah, and the other thing that I've been hearing too is, and fairly common now is, are we carbon accounting? So I did reference that, but that is coming through our sales team a little bit more often, whether it's through the CDP or through EcoVadis. So we are starting that, and I think it is important for our customers to know that we care about what they care about. And so for anybody who is truly, doing their scope 1, 2, and 3, we represent scope 3 for our customers in terms of our carbon emissions that goes into their tracking. So if a customer wants to know what the percentage of the carbon emissions that we are tracking are theirs, or that they could account for themselves, we can do that now. And so I think it's really important for our teams to be talking about it, to share that with our customers, which we are. I mean, I think our teams are now becoming more aware that we're doing this. And so we want to make sure that they knew that. But we also want them to know that we care about that. What if it's net zero in operations, and reducing the amount of energy draw is also something that they care about, that we're in that process too.
We need to work with our customers to understand what's going to be important to them. So when you think about materials, there's going to be a point of limited return, right? So we're going to hit this point where we're taking material out, or utilizing a more sustainable material isn't going to provide the same benefits, because we've already taken it so far. So what's next? And I think the important thing is really working with brand owners to understand what's next for them. We have an opinion, but our opinion nearly as important as the opinion of those brand owners and their shareholders.
Just knowing that somebody's actually going to be there with them. That's what I cared about when I was a brand owner. Somebody's going to be there with me with the life cycle of this machine. And at the end of its life cycle, when I've outgrown it, can you do something? Can you take this back and give it to someone? Can you still not hit the landfills with it? What can we do to continue to keep life on that metal?
For sure.
Great. Well, I think that's a really great place for us to finish today. Thank you guys both for being on the podcast today. Really appreciate it. So thanks again for everyone out there who's listening, and have a wonderful rest of your week.